What is happening? It's your boy LDAWB coming at you with a new video, and today we're going to talk about a topic that I find not many people are actually talking about. I found another YouTuber talking about it, but it was kind of glazed over. What this particular topic is who is in fact the most liked character in Final Fantasy 16 according to the devs. Essentially, what are the devs' favorite characters in Final Fantasy 16? And dare I say, possibly from us in the near future. So, where does this begin? This started in an interview with Gamatsu with the devs Koji Fox, Takai, Suzuki, Yoshi P, and this interaction was posted way back in February 28th, before the demo press release of now a month ago, and before this current Paxeast panel. In this interview, RPG fan, shouts out to you guys, ask the devs, were there any characters you and the staff are largely fond of, writing-wise or design-wise? Who was that? Yoshida says, well, another one of those difficult questions. It's hard to answer without giving too many spoilers. My favorite character is a character that we haven't introduced yet, okay? So I can't tell you too much about, but I can tell you that it is an older character in the game, not very young. We talk about how the game has this very dark feel. This character is very, very lovable, kind of comedic in a sense, and that's why I love him, because he brings that light to the darkness. So we have this very dark game, but when that character is in the room, he kind of lights up the room and makes everything look not so dark. So we focus on the dark, but it's not all dark. And there's one scene where that character comes out, and that's a scene where I will always cry even when I'm doing my checks. It's a very, very good scene, in quote. Now, when reading this, I thought, okay, maybe during the press release of the demos, when we'll see something, or maybe even PAX East, that we'll see a glimpse of this mystery guy, and maybe learn a bit more about him. Maybe this guy has a connection to Leviathan, perhaps. So fast forward to today, and we still don't know anything more about this guy. So I ended up having to go back to interviews from last year, all the way back from November, to surprisingly learn that this gentleman has a name, of which I found out goes by the name of Byron. So he was already mentioned way back in November, so freaking what? In context, Byron was first mentioned by Takai when asked who was his favorite character way back in November. He too mentioned everything Yoshi P mentioned with RPG fan. He says, my favorite character is a character again we haven't mentioned before. And here's this character named Byron, who I really, really like. He's an older character, but he's a great character that just makes you feel good. He's there to make you laugh, and story-wise, he's there to support Clive. So he's a good companion in that sense. But the scene in which he is first introduced to Clive, it doesn't matter how many times I've watched that scene, I always cry. It's such a great scene. So again, I can't tell you too much about the character, but please focus on the character named Byron. In another interview, he says, he hasn't been announced yet, but I like the character of Byron, who appears partway throughout the story. He's a character with an extremely likable personality, very cheerful and magnanimous. So I expect a lot of players will end up liking him just as I do. So, okay. Unfortunately, I can't go into much detail since it'll enter spoiler territory, but the scene where he first appears makes me really emotional. When I was initially carrying out cutscene checks, I found myself tearing up despite myself. I imagine he'll be announced in future promotional material. So when you see him in the game, think back to this interview. So every time he was introduced, they cried every time. Interesting. This is 3 times this is mentioned, and I wonder what event halfway in the story that will make this meeting possible. And I kid you not, I'm really itching to know more about this Byron, but more on that later. In regards to the other characters from the rest of the devs, once upon a time, Koji Fox was asked this prior and mentions a swoony bard-like character singing Clive's exploits and bravery. Then in the Gamatsu interview, he mentions the character Karen that we have now seen officially in the hideaway shown at the Paxeast panel presentation. She is described as the great old aunt that puts Clive in his place. Suzuki, the action director, mentions Clive since he put the most work and labor polishing and again polishing Clive for the past 3 years. Mihiro, the scenario writer of the game, was asked this in a previous interview way back in November, And he mentions Clive, also saying that this character is the most feeling he's ever wrote in a character. Of course, that makes sense since he's the main writer of the story and why he has this personal attachment to Clive. Now going back to Byron, we have a name. Now what on earth could he possibly look like? So far all we have are possible screenshots of him, but it's not really clear yet. In this screenshot, we have a third person traveling with Sid and Clive, holding what looks like Jill on his back, so that could be a possibility. Another one that I noticed was the character riding with Clive and Torgal, and in a previous video I mentioned that this character was Sid, but upon observing this character again, this character has cuff sleeves this time, one knife on his side I might add, versus Sid's design in his long sleeves and his two swords. So this may be Byron with Clive and Torgal. These could all be the same character, but again, none of this is set in stone. As to if Byron is a dominant, if anyone is wondering, or a possible dominant to Leviathan, Yoshi P debunks this theory and says this in regards to both Karen and Byron. He adds, the dominants are a vocal part of the story, and we go into their motivations and their arcs. But outside of the dominants, we have this great cast of characters with all these different motivations and backgrounds, and we get to explore those throughout the story. So taking the phrase, quote unquote, but outside of the dominants eliminates Byron from being a dominant. I want to echo finally what Yoshi P said about Byron. That's why I love him, because he brings that light to the darkness. So we have this very dark game, but when that character enters the room, he kind of lights up the room and makes everything not so dark. So based on reading this, if not all of the interviews from the devs so far, Byron seems to be mentioned almost as many times as Clive at this point, holding a strong impression to not only Clive the character, but the devs, and maybe, just maybe, to us, the player, in time. So when we finally see Byron for ourselves, will he be in fact the most liked character in Final Fantasy XVI? So when do you think we'll finally see this magnanimous Byron? Is he straight up going to make us all cry when we meet him for the first time? And that's it. What do you think? What other Final Fantasy games have other characters that were more likable than the main cast? For me, Laguna was the most likable character in FF8, and he could be described as the other character, and he too wasn't part of the main cast. He added a more human dimension and was very lighthearted, he was very silly, and he was very relatable as a character. So if Byron is anything like that at all, I'm pumped and excited to get to know more about him. But again, what do you guys think? I love deep diving on stuff like this because I love dissecting story elements and stuff related to Final Fantasy, but I'm excited and really looking forward to the RPG elements and info coming this month. I really can't wait, honestly. Thank you guys for watching. Much love to my Patreons. I really appreciate you guys. As a side note, I have an art project related to FF16 that I may tease, but I plan to upload it mid-April. It's an homage piece, and I hope you guys like it, so look out for that. Anyway, like, subscribe, all that jazz, and a bag of chips, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.
Knew I could be my own defender. It really fucked me up and choosing old perspectives. Evolved this far enough just to see life at clearance. Wolves howling at the moon, you like the secret weapon. Don't you dare come near me, gather strength to continue and trust my intuition. Type of Josh.